Black CEO dragged from VIP Gala seat. Seconds later, he shut the entire event down live. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below.
Thank you very much.
Now let's get back to the story. Get him away from us. Her voice sliced through crystal and violin strings like a blade dragged across glass. The ballroom had been glowing seconds ago, chandeliers dripping gold light, champagne flutes chiming softly, waiters gliding across marble like rehearsed choreography. A charity gala built on prestige and power. Silk gowns, black tuxedos, smiles curated for cameras. Now every head turned. At table 12, under the largest chandelier in the room, a black man in a tailored navy suit sat perfectly still. A uniformed security officer stood behind him, one hand resting firmly on his shoulder. The woman in the sapphire gown was still pointing. "He touched me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the orchestra's dying note. "I want him removed. Now." Her husband, broad-shouldered silver tie board member Confidence, leaned forward across the table. "You don't belong here," he added louder. "For the room. For the optics." The words didn't echo. They landed. The man in the navy suit did not stand. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his gaze and met the husband's eyes, steady, unreadable, unafraid. The security officer tightened his grip slightly, fingers pressing into the fabric at his shoulder.
"Sir," the officer said, quietly rehearsed authority in his tone.
"We're going to need you to come with us." A phone lifted 3 tables away. Then another. Whispers rippled across linen and crystal. He slipped in. "I knew something was off. These events are invite only." The orchestra had stopped playing. The room felt charged now, not loud but electric, like a storm deciding whether to break. The man adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate calm. He had seen this before. Different city. Different chandelier. Same assumption. The husband's jaw flexed. "I said remove him." The woman recoiled slightly in her chair, still indignant, still pointing. "I don't feel safe." The phrase worked. It always did. The security officer leaned closer. "Sir, please stand." The man finally spoke. Low. Even. Controlled. "Careful where you put your hands." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A few seats down, a young event assistant, clipboard clutched too tightly, frowned at her tablet. She recognized that face. Not from gossip. Not from tabloids. From the master sponsor deck. But the event director was already moving toward the table, smile stretched thin. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, though he already knew. "This man assaulted my wife," the husband declared. The word assaulted hung heavy in the air, heavier than truth. The director looked at the navy suit, at the quiet posture, at the absence of panic. He chose a side. "Sir," he said crisply, "this section is reserved for principal donors and board members." The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the stage, toward the massive LED screen that displayed the evening's title in gold lettering, toward the foundation logo shining brighter than any name in the room. Then back to the director. "And who," he asked calmly, "do you think funds this room?" Silence cracked across the table. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to him. The security officer's grip tightened again. The husband stood abruptly, chair scraping across marble. "You touched the wrong woman," he hissed. The man in the navy suit rose slowly to his feet. Not pulled. Not pushed. He stood on his own, and for the first time the room felt small around him. The silence didn't last. It never does. A murmur began at the back of the ballroom, soft at first, like fabric brushing against fabric. Then sharper. Phones lifted higher. Camera lenses adjusted. The husband stepped closer, invading space he didn't own. "You think this is a joke?" he said, voice rising now, performance layered over outrage. "You brushed past my wife, and now you're pretending you belong at this table." The man in the navy suit didn't step back. "I walked to my seat," he replied evenly. "That's all." The woman let out a breathy scoff. "Don't lie. You were hovering." Hovering. The word slid across the room like something dirty. The security officer shifted his stance, hand still firm on the CEO's shoulder, now more visible. "More intentional." "Sir?" the officer repeated louder, this time aware of the growing audience. "We can handle this privately." Privately. Meaning away from witnesses. The event director forced a tight smile at the surrounding tables. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're resolving a minor issue." Minor. The CEO's eyes scanned the room. The crystal centerpieces, the embossed programs, the foundation logo projected 20 feet high behind the stage. His foundation logo. 3 tables over, the young event assistant stared down at her tablet again. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the master sponsor document. There it was. Name main. Title. Majority contributor. She looked up from the tablet to the man being restrained. Her throat tightened. "This is ridiculous," the husband snapped. "He's clearly not on the board." The CEO turned his head slightly. Clearly the word hung between them. "You think a tailored suit and a printed name card get you access to this level?" the husband continued, voice swelling with certainty. "This table is for people who built something." The CEO's jaw tightened just enough to register. Built something. Flash. 23 years old. Bank loan denied. Your projections are unrealistic. 31. First acquisition. Who's backing you? 42. Net worth published. Self-made doubtful. Back to the ballroom. The security officer's fingers pressed harder, now subtle but unmistakable. "You need to leave the officer," said quietly. "This is escalating." The CEO finally turned fully toward him. "Is it," he asked softly, "or is it being escalated across the room?" Someone whispered, "This is about to go viral." The event director's earpiece crackled. A producer backstage asking what was happening. The assistant took one hesitant step forward. "Sir," she said, voice barely steady, addressing the director, not the CEO. "I think there's been a mistake." The director shot her a warning look. "Not now." But the assistant swallowed and spoke again. "He's listed as the primary sponsor." The words didn't echo. They detonated. The husband laughed, sharp, dismissive. "That's impossible." The CEO's gaze shifted back to him. "Impossible," he repeated calmly. Then, without raising his voice, he reached into his inner jacket pocket. Not fast. Not dramatic. Measured. And pulled out his phone. He didn't unlock the screen immediately. He let them watch him. The husband smirked. "Calling your lawyer," the woman folded her arms, vindicated by the attention. "Or security for backup." A few nervous laughs flickered from nearby tables. The CEO glanced down at the display. No panic in his movements. No tremor in his hands. Then he tapped once. "Rachel," he said calmly, lifting the phone to his ear. "Initiate executive review." Liv. The event director stiffened. Live across town, 30 floors above the city, a glass-walled office lit up as if someone had flipped a switch. Monitors blinked awake. A board liaison straightened in her chair. Rachel didn't hesitate. "Confirmed." "Do you want full access?" "Yes," he replied. Freeze disbursement. Flag tonight's account. The director stepped forward. Sir, if you're trying to intimidate the CEO, held up one finger. Not to silence him. To finish his sentence. Also, he continued into the phone voice level project, a primary sponsor ledger to the main screen. The ballroom air shifted. The husband scoffed. This is absurd. The LED wall behind the stage flickered. At first, it looked like a technical glitch. The Gala logo shimmered. The gold letters distorted. The orchestra conductor turned around in confusion. What's happening? Someone whispered. The event director reached for his earpiece. Control, fix the screen. But Control wasn't answering him. They were answering someone else. The CEO lowered the phone from his ear but didn't hang up. Stay with me, he said quietly. The screen behind the podium went black. Then white. Then a document appeared. Not decorative. Not stylized. A financial ledger. Columns. Figures. Authorized signatures. At the top, bold and undeniable primary benefactor, 68% funding allocation below it. His name, spelled correctly. The murmur that followed wasn't gossip anymore. It was recognition. The assistant's shoulders dropped in relief. The husband's expression cracked just slightly. This doesn't prove anything, he snapped too quickly. The CEO turned to him. You said this table was for people who built something. He gestured subtly toward the screen, toward the percentage that dwarfed every other name listed. I built this night. The security officer's hand loosened. Not dramatically. Just enough. The woman in sapphire looked back at the LED wall as if it might change its mind. It didn't. The event director swallowed. There must be some misunderstanding there, as the CEO agreed. A beat. You mistook presence for intrusion. The phone buzzed softly in his hand. Rachel again. Funding freeze confirmed, she said. Pending your final instruction. The orchestra remained silent. The champagne stopped pouring. And for the first time that evening, the power in the room was no longer decorative. It was directional. No one clapped. No one gasped. The silence was heavier than either. The LED screen didn't flicker this time. It held steady, bright and clinical, the numbers impossible to argue with. 68%. Majority control. His name anchored at the top like a signature carved into stone. The husband's face lost color first, then posture. That he started, but the confidence that had filled his voice minutes ago had thinned into something brittle. That doesn't mean you can just accuse me, the CEO finished quietly. He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. The security officer fully removed his hand. It wasn't dramatic. There was no apology. Just a slow withdrawal, as if realizing he'd been holding on to something far more volatile than he understood. The woman in sapphire lowered her arm. Her finger, which had been pointing like a weapon, dropped to her side. I felt uncomfortable, she said weakly, now speaking to the room instead of commanding it. The CEO looked at her, not angry, not mocking. Measured. You felt uncomfortable, he repeated. So, you decided I didn't belong. The event director moved in quickly, smile reassembled, tone recalibrated. Sir, he began, voice softer, now deferential. If we could speak privately, no, the CEO said. One word. Calm. Definitive. You wanted this handled publicly. His gaze swept the ballroom, the donors, the board members, the cameras that were no longer hiding. So, we'll finish it publicly. The husband straightened, clinging to the last fragments of pride. You embarrassed my wife. The CEO tilted his head slightly. You accused me of assault in a room my foundation finances. A pause. Embarrassment isn't the issue. His phone buzzed again. Rachel's voice was steady. Venue management has been notified. Sponsorship suspension ready for confirmation. Media partners requesting comment. The CEO didn't look down at the phone this time. He kept his eyes on the director. "Pull the funding," he said. There was no rise in his tone, no theatrical emphasis, just instruction. On the LAD wall, the document shifted. A red banner appeared across the top: funding status suspended pending investigation. A collective inhale moved through the room like a single organism. The orchestra conductor stepped back from his podium. The master of ceremonies lowered his cue cards. The director's earpiece crackled frantically now. "Wait," the director said, panic leaking through. "We can resolve this. There's no need to jeopardize the entire evening." The CEO's expression didn't change. "The evening was jeopardized," he replied evenly, "the moment you decided who qualified to sit in it." The husband looked around, searching for allies. There were none. Only distance. The security officer cleared his throat. "Sir, I apologize." It wasn't loud, but it carried. The CEO nodded once. Not to accept. Not to absolve. Just to acknowledge. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, automatic response to the funding suspension protocol tied to the event's staging system. The glow that had once made everything shimmer now felt colder, flatter, exposed. The CEO adjusted his jacket. "You don't get to weaponize discomfort," he said quietly. "Not here."
And this time no one argued.
No one reached for their champagne now. No one checked their watch. The energy in the ballroom had shifted from spectacle to scrutiny. The woman in sapphire finally found her voice again, but it was thinner this time. "You're overreacting," she said, clinging to something that no longer held weight. "It was a misunderstanding." The CEO regarded her for a long moment. "A misunderstanding," he echoed softly, "is when two people hear different words." He let that settle. "This," he continued, "was an assumption." The husband bristled. "You brushed against her chair." She turned. "You were too close." The CEO nodded once. "In a crowded ballroom. You invaded her space." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the table, the place cards, the embossed programs, the foundation crest, stamped into every napkin ring. Then, he looked back at the husband. "You accused me of assault," he said evenly, "in front of donors, board members, media." His voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "And you did it because you were certain the room would believe you." Silence. No one denied it. Across the ballroom, phones were no longer discreet. They were steady. "Recording." The event director tried again. "Sir, if we can just move forward." The CEO interrupted, calm but immovable. Forward without addressing what just happened. He stepped away from the table now, not retreating, but repositioning, placing himself where everyone could see him clearly beneath the chandelier light. He didn't look smaller, standing alone. If anything, the space seemed to widen around him. "I walked to my assigned seat," he said, projecting just enough for the room to hear. "I pulled out my chair. And within seconds, I was told I didn't belong." He let his gaze sweep the ballroom again. "You didn't ask my name." A beat. "You didn't check the ledger." Another beat. "You went straight to removal." The security officer shifted uncomfortably. The husband opened his mouth, but nothing came. The CEO's phone buzzed once more. "Rachel." "Media outlets are picking up the feed," she said quietly. "The funding suspension is trending." He nodded faintly. "Good, good." Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket. This part didn't require technology. It required clarity. "You don't get to weaponize accusation," he said, voice steady, unshaken. "Not when it costs someone their name." The woman's shoulders sank. "I didn't mean for it to escalate like this." The CEO looked at her directly. "It didn't escalate," he replied. "You escalated it." A pause. "You called for removal before you called for truth?" The room absorbed that. The orchestra remained still. The LED screen still displayed the suspended status. The night-polished, curated, rehearsed had cracked open, and the narrative was no longer theirs to control. No one returned to their seats. Not really. They hovered caught between leaving and witnessing. The event director stepped closer again, but slower now. Calculated. Mr. Carter, he said carefully. This time using the name he should have used from the beginning, we can issue a statement. Clarify that emotions ran high. The CEO studied him. Emotions, he repeated. He gestured lightly toward the husband. Was it emotion when he said I didn't belong toward the security officer? Was it emotion when I was physically removed from my seat, then toward the LED wall still glowing with the red suspension banner? Or was it assumption protected by confidence? The director didn't answer. He couldn't. Across the ballroom, a senior board member, older, silver-haired, previously silent, stood up slowly. Is the funding truly suspended? She asked, not to the director. To him. Yes, the CEO replied. Effective immediately. A ripple moved through the room. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't theatrical. This was operational. The husband exhaled sharply. You'd collapse an entire charity night over a misunderstanding. The CEO turned toward him fully now. I didn't collapse it, he said. You exposed it. The word hung there. Exposed. The assistant, the one who had spoken up, stepped closer, standing a few feet behind him now. Not hiding. I tried to say something, she murmured more to herself than anyone else. The CEO heard it. And you did, he said without turning. That matters. The security officer shifted again, visibly uneasy. I followed protocol, he said, almost defensive. The CEO nodded slightly. Protocol is only as good as the bias that informs it. That landed harder than shouting would have. Phones were no longer just recording. They were streaming. Comments were moving in real time across screens. Gala shut down You Don't Belong. The director's phone buzzed relentlessly. Sponsors asking questions. Vendors demanding clarification. This is spiraling, the director whispered. The CEO's expression remained composed. It spiraled the moment a woman pointed at me and the room assumed she was right. He stepped away from the table entirely, now moving toward the center aisle beneath the largest chandelier. The light caught the navy of his suit, sharp, intentional, controlled. This foundation was built to elevate voices, he said, not shouting but carrying, not silence them. No applause. Just listening. You cannot build equity on a stage where belonging is decided by appearance. The husband looked smaller now. Not physically. Socially. The CEO reached into his jacket again, not for the phone this time, for a folded copy of the evening's program. He held it up briefly. Tonight was about opportunity, he said. About fairness. He let the paper lower. And you tried to deny both before you asked a single question. The LED screen flickered again, this time displaying a simple line beneath the suspension notice. Internal review. Initiated. The director stared at it like a verdict. The CEO met his eyes one last time. This isn't revenge, he said quietly. It's correction. The room didn't feel grand anymore. It felt examined. The red banner still stretched across the LED wall like a scar. Funding status. Suspended. Internal review. Initiated. No music. No clinking glass. No curated laughter. Just consequence. The senior board member stepped forward carefully. Mr. Carter, she began, voice controlled but strained, are you intending to withdraw permanently? Every head turned again. Not toward the couple. Not toward security. Toward him. He didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly toward the stage. Not rushed. Not theatrical. Each step deliberate against the marble floor. The husband tried once more. This is disproportionate. The CEO stopped halfway down the aisle and looked back. Disproportionate, he repeated. You accused me of assault in front of a room full of investors. A beat. You tried to have me physically removed. Another beat. You never asked my name. The husband's jaw tightened. The CEO continued walking. When he reached the stage steps, no one blocked him. They parted. On stage beneath the same lights meant to celebrate generosity, he turned to face the ballroom. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need amplification. You built this narrative in seconds, he said, voice steady but carrying. You saw a black man at a VIP table and filled in the rest. The words didn't accuse. They clarified. I didn't bump your chair, he continued, looking at the woman in sapphire. A server passed between us. You turned abruptly. That was it. A few guests nodded, subtly remembering. But instead of asking, he said you pointed. His eyes swept the room, and everyone followed the finger. That landed. The security officer looked down. The director avoided eye contact. The CEO gestured lightly toward the massive screen behind him. My foundation underwrote 68% of this gala, he said calmly. Not for prestige. Not for applause. For access. A pause. For people who are told they don't belong. The irony sat heavy in the air. He finally reached for the microphone. Not to shout. To formalize. My name is Daniel Carter, he said clearly. Founder. Majority stakeholder. And the man you tried to remove from his own event. Silence pressed in from every direction. Then softer but far more cutting, you didn't touch the wrong guest tonight. He looked directly at the husband. You touched the wrong man. No one moved. Not the husband. Not the woman in sapphire. Not the director clenching his earpiece like it might save him. Daniel Carter stood beneath the chandelier light microphone, steady in his hand, not trembling, not triumphant. Measured. The husband finally exhaled sharply. You're destroying a charity over pride? Daniel's eyes met his. No, he said calmly. I'm protecting it. A murmur spread softer this time, reflective rather than reactive. The senior board member stepped closer to the stage. Daniel, she said, carefully dropping the formal tone. If there's a path to repair this, there is, he replied. Every word deliberate, but repair requires acknowledgement. He turned slightly toward the couple. Not misunderstanding. Not emotion. Acknowledgement. The woman swallowed. Cameras were still trained on her now, no longer allies, just witnesses. I reacted, she said, voice thin. I shouldn't have assumed. The husband stiffened, but the room was no longer on his side. Daniel nodded once. That's where this begins. His phone vibrated in his pocket again. Rachel. He switched the microphone off for a brief moment and answered quietly. Yes. A pause. Understood. He ended the call and turned the microphone back on. Effective immediately, he said, voice carrying across marble and crystal, tonight's funding will remain suspended until an independent review board is established. A ripple moved through the donors. This event will not continue under optics alone, he added. It will continue under standards. The LED screen shifted again. The red banner minimized. In its place appeared new text, Independent Oversight Committee pending formation, gasps this time. Not theatrical. Structural. The director looked pale. You're restructuring the foundation live. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. I'm correcting it live. The security officer stepped forward slightly, clearing his throat. Mr. Carter, he said, voice lower, now stripped of authority and left with humanity, I apologize. I acted before verifying. Daniel studied him for a moment. Verification should always come before force, he replied evenly. The officer nodded. The husband looked around again, still searching for alignment. But the social gravity had shifted. Donors who once leaned toward him now leaned back. Distance forming in real time. Daniel stepped down from the stage. Not rushed. Not angry. Composed. This foundation was created to fund access, he said, walking past the table where it began, not to deny it based on comfort. He stopped briefly beside the young assistant who had spoken up earlier. Thank you, he said quietly. Her eyes welled, but she held steady. The orchestra conductor lifted his baton, hesitantly waiting. Daniel looked toward the board. Tonight can continue, he said, but under review, a beat, and under watch. The room exhaled, not in relief, in recalibration. The orchestra resumed.
Softly.
Not celebratory, cautious. Like the room itself was testing whether it deserved music again. Guests slowly returned to their seats, but posture had changed. Conversations were quieter. Laughter, if it surfaced, carried restraint. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer, watching, not scanning for approval, observing recalibration. The husband sat down first, not because he wanted to, because he had nowhere else to stand. His wife kept her eyes on the tablecloth, fingers tracing the rim of her untouched glass. The event director approached again, slower than before ego recalculated. Mr. Carter, he said, voice stripped of polish. I failed to pause. Daniel met his eyes. You failed to question, he corrected. A small difference. A massive one. Across the ballroom, the LED screen no longer displayed red. It showed a new slide belonging is not determined by perception.
Some guests read it twice.
The senior board member stepped beside Daniel quietly. You've changed the temperature of this organization tonight, she said. Daniel gave a faint nod. It needed to be. He looked back toward the table where it started. The place card with his name still sat there, untouched, exactly where it had always been. He walked back to it, not reclaiming, reaffirming. He pulled the chair out calmly and sat. No applause. No grand gesture. Just correction. The assistant who had spoken up earlier returned to her post near the stage, but she stood taller now. The security officer resumed his position farther back this time. Aware. Phones were still recording, but the tone online had shifted. Not scandal. Standard. Daniel folded his hands lightly on the table. I didn't shut this event down, he said quietly, though the nearest tables heard him clearly. I raised the threshold. The husband swallowed. The wife looked up briefly, not defiant now, but reflective. Daniel continued, voice steady, unwavering. You don't protect spaces by narrowing them. A pause. You protect them by holding them accountable. The orchestra swelled slightly, not triumphant, but restored. Daniel glanced once more at the chandelier above the same light that had once exposed him, now illuminating evenly across every face in the room. Then he lifted his glass not to toast himself, but to the room. To better, he said. Not louder. Just clearer. And this time, when the glasses clinked in response, it wasn't out of habit. It was out of understanding. The music returned fully now. Not loud. Not triumphant. Balanced. Waiters resumed their routes, but slower eyes, more aware movements, more intentional. Conversations restarted in careful tones, no longer floating above consequence, but shaped by it. Daniel remained seated at table 12. The place card in front of him no longer looked symbolic. It looked accurate. Across from him, the husband shifted in his chair, discomfort settling where dominance once lived. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did, he said, finally, voice lower than before, not for the room this time, just for the table. Daniel looked at him evenly. You reacted based on certainty, he replied. Not information. The difference mattered. The woman in sapphire cleared her throat softly. I've never been in a situation like this. Daniel nodded once. I have. That landed heavier than accusation. Around them, other donors leaned in, not to eavesdrop, but to understand. The senior board member approached the table again. The oversight committee will be assembled by morning, she said. We'll include external review. Daniel met her gaze. Good, She hesitated. You could have walked out tonight. I could have agreed, but leaving doesn't fix structure. Across the ballroom, the LAD screen now displayed a new slide equity requires verification before judgment. Guests read it in silence. Phones were still streaming. Comment feeds moved rapidly. News outlets had already begun framing the incident, some calling it a scandal, others calling it a turning point. Daniel wasn't watching. He didn't need to. The assistant who had spoken earlier approached carefully. "Mr. Carter," she said, standing beside him, "thank you for not exploding." A faint smile touched his expression. "Anger is easy," he said. "Correction is harder." She nodded, absorbing that. At the edge of the ballroom, the security officer stood straighter now, not rigid, but recalibrated. The event director walked past the stage, pausing beneath the LAD screen as if reading it for the first time instead of projecting it. The room had not collapsed. It had shifted. Daniel lifted his glass once more, but this time he didn't speak. He simply took a measured sip. The orchestra transitioned into something steadier, not celebratory, but assured. Across the table, the husband looked at Daniel again. "You said I never asked your name," he said quietly. Daniel held his gaze. "You didn't. A beat."
So I'll say it again.
He extended his hand across the table. "Daniel Carter." The husband hesitated, then took it. The handshake wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And in a ballroom that had almost chosen assumption over inquiry, acknowledgement was the only currency that mattered. The gala continued, but it no longer floated above reality. It moved through it. Dessert was served. Speeches resumed. Applause returned softer, more intentional. The orchestra found its rhythm again, but the sound carried weight now, not just elegance. Daniel sat back in his chair, posture relaxed but alert. Across the ballroom, clusters of guests leaned into conversations that no longer revolved around fashion or networking. They were talking about process, about verification, about how quickly certainty becomes error when it's filtered through bias. The senior board member took the stage once more. "We began tonight celebrating generosity," she said into the microphone. "We will end it celebrating accountability." That line earned real applause. Not because it was polished, because it was earned. Daniel watched without expression, not detached, present. The husband and his wife had fallen quiet. The sharp edges of their earlier certainty had dissolved into something less comfortable reflection. At the neighboring tables, donors who once measured value and access now seemed to measure it in awareness. The LAD screen displayed a final message for the evening: belonging is a standard, not a guest. Daniel's phone vibrated lightly. "Rachel." "Media requests are overwhelming," she said. "They want a statement. Some are calling you decisive. Others are calling it extreme." Daniel considered that. "Draft one sentence," he replied. "No emotion. No accusation." "What's the sentence?" she asked. He looked around the ballroom at the lights, the restored music, the assistant standing taller than before, the security officer now vigilant without being presumptive. He spoke calmly. "Standards protect institutions. Assumptions weaken them." Rachel paused. "Understood." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket. The event director approached one final time, no smile this time, just sincerity. "I built this gala from scratch," he said quietly. "And tonight nearly cost it everything." Daniel met his eyes. "No," he corrected gently. "Tonight saved it from repeating itself." The director absorbed that. A few feet away, the assistant who had spoken up earlier was being quietly thanked by another board member. Not spotlighted. Recognized. Daniel rose from his seat once more, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He didn't return to the stage. He didn't claim another microphone. He simply walked toward the exit at the back of the ballroom. Not hurried. Not dramatic. As he reached the doors, the husband's voice carried softly behind him. Mr. Carter. Daniel paused, but didn't turn immediately. Thank you, the man said. Not defensive. Not performative. Just honest. Daniel nodded once, then stepped through the doors into the quieter corridor beyond. Inside the ballroom, the gala continued, but it would never run the same way again. The corridor outside the ballroom was quiet. No chandeliers. No cameras. No applause measured in decibels. Just soft lighting and the distant echo of an orchestra trying to return to elegance. Daniel walked slowly, the sound of his shoes steady against polished stone. Not rushed. Not burdened. Inside, the gala had resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. Back in the ballroom, conversations carried a new vocabulary. Verification. Oversight. Process. Words that rarely headline a charity event but should. The senior board member stood near the stage already speaking with legal counsel. The director, no longer posturing, was listening more than talking. The assistant who had spoken up earlier was being invited into a discussion she would never have been included in before tonight. Not because she demanded it, because she earned it. At table 12, the husband and his wife sat in reflective silence. The wife finally spoke. I reacted to a feeling. The husband nodded slowly, and we treated that feeling like fact. Neither of them looked toward the stage anymore. They looked inward. Inside the ballroom, the LED screen shifted one last time. No branding. No logos. Just a single line in white against black: belonging is verified, not assumed. Guests read it quietly. Some nodded. Some avoided eye contact with their own thoughts. Outside, Daniel paused near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. His phone vibrated once more. Rachel. It's everywhere, she said. Clips are circulating. The phrase "you touched the wrong man" is trending. Daniel allowed himself the faintest exhale. Good, he said. Let it trend. A pause. But make sure the focus stays on the standard, not me. Rachel understood. I'll steer it. He ended the call and looked back through the glass doors at the ballroom behind him. The music had stabilized. The lighting no longer flickered. But the atmosphere was different, more alert, less entitled. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply adjusted his jacket once more. He hadn't shut the gala down. He had interrupted a pattern. And patterns once interrupted publicly don't return quietly. As he walked toward the exit, one final thought lingered, not bitter, not triumphant. Clear. You don't protect powerful spaces by guarding who looks like they belong. You protect them by demanding that belonging be earned through truth. Inside, the gala continued. Outside, the standard remained, and Daniel Carter didn't raise his voice that night. He raised the threshold.